Hello guys, welcome back. This is episode 12 of our multiplayer chat series. In this episode, what we will do is we'll finalize the private conversation UMG widget so it can receive and send private conversation messages to and from the player controller. And we will finish the player controller so the player controller can receive messages to send from the private conversation UMG widget, as well as the player controller will be able to push messages into the UMG widget. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I need to do is I need to add in like a testing or a shim for my player's usernames. So that's going to be a way to identify a user when you type in a private message command in the chat box. In your system, this will be different. You would be getting a username from a login page and storing it in the PlayerState, or you might be integrated with Steam, in which case you'll use probably a Steam username. So in my PlayerState, I'm going to add a new username variable. I'll make it of type string, and I will make it private. And I will create two new functions. The first will be set username. Its input, one and only input, will be of type string, and it will be called username. And then we'll go ahead and drag off this and set it. And we will keep this public. Let's go ahead and create a new function called get username. And this will have a return node. And let's drag the username variable on the event graph and get it, and drag the wire here, and it'll automatically connect that for us. We will leave this as public, but let's make it appear. And then what I need to do is let's jump into our game mode. You could probably skip this step because what I'm going to be doing now is just mocking usernames and assigning a random username to a player when they join the game. So I'm going to create a new variable to contain my different username choices that the game mode will choose from. And I will make this a array of strings, private. Let's go ahead and compile this. And for my choices, what I will do is just add in, let's just add in dummy usernames. Grunt, Sky, Stu Venom, and Tron Paul. And let's do Red Shipley. So that's private, and then I will create another string array called unavailable usernames, because I don't want, if one of these username choices are assigned out to a player, I don't want some other player to have the same username. Let's go ahead and create a function in here called find random username, and its output will be of type not name but string, and we'll call it username. And let's make some room. Okay, let's go ahead and we can make this private as well. So in here, what we need to do is grab the username choice array, and we need to for each loop it. And what we need to do is say, okay, let's get the unavailable usernames, and let's execute a contains item. What we need to say is, okay, if the current username choice is not contained within the unavailable usernames, so let's not to invert that, and let's add a branch. So if the current username we might pick up, if it's not unavailable, we may assign it out. So what we need to do is we need to grab our unavailable usernames, get it, and we need to call add. And we need to grab our username again that we are currently iterating. We need to add it to the list of unavailable usernames, so no other player will be assigned this username again. And then after we add it, we can execute our return node, and we can return the username. And for this, we'll just add a return node. I'm going to leave it blank. I won't have that many players to exhaust all of the usernames. And again, this is just a bunch of mocked data here. You shouldn't have this in your project unless you're mocking or testing. And in the game mode event graph, I need to grab my find random username, wire up the execution pins, and then what I need to do is, let's see, I need to get this player state right here, and I need to call set username and connect up the username parameters, connect up the execution pin, and now each player, when they join the map, they should be assigned a random username, which will be used throughout the entire chat system. And let's go ahead and go to our chat folder and create a new blueprint structure, and we will call this S private conversation. Let's open this up, and let's call this conversation ID of type GUID. Let's create a few more variables. We'll call this one players, and its type will be BP player controller reference, and it will be an array. And let's call the third one messages, which will be of type schat message array. And let's create the last one, which will be player usernames of type string array. And the whole point of this player usernames is so we're going to be looking up users based off their username quite often, and we don't want to always have to iterate the BP player controllers objects and then cast them, grab their player state, cast their player state, and then get their username. You know, that'll be at least 2 casts that we have to do to look up one username, and that's just too much performance overhead on the authority server side. Let me do a quick check. Our schat message. Okay, great. In our last episode, I updated our schat message structure, so it has an author username string instead of an author ID. Let's go ahead and open up our chat box message. Go to the event graph, and let's delete this to text and connect the author username right there. And let's go ahead and play. And now, when I send a message in the chat box, I do not have a username. Okay, need to figure out why. Oh, right. Let's go back to our player controller. Open up the player controller. Let's go to the chat event graph. And what we need to do is we need to assign the username to the schat message that the chat box creates. And the way we're going to do that is we'll go to this event graph. Let's look for our bootstrap all. Let's make it a little bit wider. Let's move this player state down. No, I'm sorry. Let me refer to my notes really quick. Okay, let's go ahead and take care of this later down the road. We're not quite that far yet. Okay, so let's open up the chat folder again. And this time, we'll go ahead and open up the private conversation message. Go to the graph. And then in here, we can assign out the author node text. So let's call set text and drag the author username, plug it in right there. And let's connect the sequence up just like that. Okay, pretty messy, but that's all we need to do in here. Let's go ahead and open up the widget blueprint for the private conversation. Let's go to the event graph. And we can close these. We no longer need those open. Those are from our last episode. What we need to do is Let's go ahead and create a new custom event, and we will call this set conversation messages, and it will have an input of type schat chat message array, and we will call this messages. And let's go ahead and grab this message list, get it, and we will call clear children. And then let's go ahead and connect up these execution wires. Let's grab the messages array and for each loop. So for each message, we need to cut this and move it over here. For each message, we need to create a new private conversation message widget. Just like that. And assign it to the vertical box and then scroll to the end. Actually, this scroll to end, we'll cut that and we will move that right here. That way it'll be a little bit more performant. It won't be scrolling to the end every single time we add a new item to the vertical box. We can go ahead and delete receive message, and then let's go back to our player controller, BP player controller, and go to our chat event graph and then delete this because that event no longer exists. Compile and save. And then let's go ahead and open up our onSend message dispatcher. We will add a new property down here. Let's see, and this will be of type BP or widget blueprint WB private conversation reference. It will not be an array. And then we'll call this conversation window. It's just the instance of the UMG widget. Move that up, compile and save. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing for this to keep things consistent. Conversation window, compile and save. We'll probably get an error. There we go. Right click, refresh nodes, plug in self, compile and save. And then BP player controller probably has an error as well. And let's plug that in there. Okay, let's go back to our private conversation. And what we need to do, let's see, we'll move this down. Create a new, or actually add the event construct. And what we need to do is get owning player. And we need to cast to BP player controller. Connect this up. Right click, promote to variable, and call this BP player controller. Let's go ahead and make that private. And then let's go ahead and grab our friend name, get it, and call set text. Just like that. And then create a new function called make conversation title, and drag off here and add a return node, and its return type will be text, and we will call this title. And then let's go back to the event graph, select our make conversation title, make it private and pure, compile and save, and drag this on the event graph and connect up the output node. Okay, let's go ahead and create a new function called get conversation participant, and let's make that private and pure, compile and save, and open it up. Okay, it is open. Now what we need to do in here is we need to get the see, we need to create a new variable again and call this private conversation. It will be of type s private conversation, which is our new structure we created. Let's make it private, expose on spawn, and editable. Compile and save, and then drag this on the event graph and get it, and then break it. And then we only need the player usernames. Drag off the player usernames array and for each loop. And then right click the array element pin, promote to local variable, and just call it participant name. And connect up the execution nodes. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to grab our BP player controller class variable we created, get it, and we need to call, we can't call that because I haven't created it yet. Okay, let's open up our BPI player controller, our interface for our player controller, add a new function called get username, and assign it to the player controller category, and the output will be of type string, and it will be the username. Compile and save. Okay, let's go back to our WB private conversation. Let's get the BP player controller and call get username and the message call, and connect up the execution pin just like that. Now what we need to say is, okay, if the user who owns this widget, if his username is not equal to the participant name, basically the username that we are currently iterating, then we can use that name as the title. So we will have it on the true branch, we'll have a return node, and we will get the participant name and plug it in right there. And let's go ahead and rename this, and we'll just call it participant. Or actually, we'll just call it username. So what this will do is, if I'm in a private conversation, this will return the other player's name for that conversation, but only for me, on my client machine. If this executed on their end, it would return my name and not their name. And you'll see what this is used for in just a second. Let's drag our get conversation participant, get it, and plug it into this title property, or the title return output. And then let's see, I think that's it. Let's go back to the event graph and just do a quick check. Okay, let's go back to our, let's see, I think that's okay. Let's go ahead and go back to our chat folder in the content browser. Right click, go to blueprints, blueprint interface, and call it BPI underscore private chat system underscore actually that's it, just BPI underscore private chat system. Go ahead and open that. And what we need to do is we need to add a new function in here called send private message. It will have 3 outputs, so create 3 new outputs. The first one will be of type string, and it will be the to username, the username of the person we are sending the message to. And the second will be of type s chat message, and this will be the private message. And the third will be of type BP player controller reference, and this will be the from player. This will be the player controller instance of the player that just sent the message. And we will assign this to a category of private chat system. Compile and save. Let's add a new function, and this one will be called get private messages, and its input will be conversation ID, which is type GUID, and the second one will be requesting player, and this one will be of type BP player controller reference, and the output will be the private messages, which is of type schat message array. Go ahead and compile and save that. And then let's open up the BPI player controller, and we have this filled in. Let's go ahead and open up the player controller now. Where did that go? Right here. So in here, let's go to the event graph, and then actually let's go back to the content browser. Where did it go? I somehow lost. Wait a minute. Let's close some of these windows. Here it is. Okay, let's go to the blueprints, go to the BP game state. Let's go to the class settings, and let's go ahead and implement our new BPI private chat system interface for the game state. Let's go to this error, and we can just, for now, make array. And remove this pen, compile and save. And then let's go ahead and create a new function called getPrivateChatSystem. And let's go ahead and make it public. And drag off here and do a return node. And what we need to do is we need to get an instance of self. And we need to cast to BPI private chat system. Plug that interface pin there, and if it completes, return the interface. If it fails, let's just add a return node, and it won't return a valid object instance. We can just move this down here. Okay, let's go ahead and assign this to the category private chat system. Compile and save. And let's close the game state for now. We won't be back in there for this episode. Let's go to the player controller event graph and the bootstrap. I think it's bootstrap all. Yeah, bootstrap all. Let's move the player state down. And let's drag off the as BP game state and call get private chat system, and connect up the execution, and right click the interface node and promote to variable, and we will call this private chat system, and we can make it private. Connect that back up, and those pins broke for some reason. Let's connect them back. Okay, and let's see. We're going to go ahead and I will leave that for now. Let's go to the I think it's the chat graph right here, and let's see, it's right in here. Let's expand this out. We need to add some stuff here. So what we need to do is move this down a little bit. Okay, let's drag off this message return node, or reroute node. And we need to call set members in schat message. And we need to set the author username. And the way we're going to do that is we will call BP. Actually, let's do this. Let's go ahead and go to the player controller interface first. We have to fill in this method. So this is the get username that's supplied through get BPI player controller. What we'll do is we will get the player state, and we'll call get username, and we'll connect that up like that. And let's see. Let's compile and save. We can close this. And let's add a nice little helper function called my username. and we can make this private and peer. And let's drag off this and add a return node. And what it'll do is it'll call this get username function that is supplied through the BPI player controller interface. And like that. Compile and save. Close this. Close the event graph. Go back to the chat event graph. And then drag our my username. Except we did not connect up the username return node. There we go. And now we can plug in the username. And then get this struct out. And we can connect it right there. Okay. So now, let's look over this. When a chat message is sent, we are setting the username to the current player, but we do that on the server. Okay, and we're running at 26 minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and let's grab this and cut it, and then create a new event graph called private chat, and paste it in here and compile and save. Okay, I believe we're done with this chat graph for now. Yeah, let's go ahead and close this and go to the private chat. So what we need to do in here is we need to on chat send private message. So this is send private message from chat box. And then this is send send new private message to server. So let's call this send private chat message to server. There we go. Let's compile that. Error cannot. Okay, whatever. We're going to. What's going on here? Let's delete this and then compile and save. Recombine. Find a function. Oh, let's right click and refresh node. Refresh node on here. Okay, whatever. We'll just call it again. Search for send private chat message to server and connect up the target player to the message. Compile and save. Okay. And let's expand this out. Okay, so what we need to do is add in a, just for a good measure, we'll add in a switch authority. Drag off the authority, and actually drag off the message. And what we need to do is we need to call set members in as chat message, and we need to set the username. We just did that for the chat box, but not the private message. So drag off my username, connect it up right there. And then we need to call private chat system, get it, and we need to call send chat message or send private message interface call, and grab the struct out, plug it into the private message, drag off the from player, and pass in self, and the to username. We'll pass in the target player here and connect up the execution pin. And okay. So let's see. So in the chat box, when a private message is sent from the chat box, we now replicate it to the server and we pass it to the private chat system interface object, which is not implemented right now, but it will still work because it's an interface. Let's go ahead and we need to add a new interface called, so let's go to our content browser, go to the chat, right click, blueprint interface, and call this BPI private chat system underscore conversation listener, and open this up and add a function called on private conversation updated. and its one and only input will be of type S chat message. I'm sorry, it will be of type S private conversation structure, and we'll call this private conversation. Compile and save, close this, go to our BP player controller, go to the class settings and implement that new listener, BPI private chat system conversation listener. Compile and save, and then let's go ahead and right click this event graph and look for on private conversation updated, and at the top under add event, let's add that new event. And let's right click, add a new custom event, and we will call this one push private conversation to client. So when there's a new private conversation message that is added, whether it's from myself or from the other guy I'm talking to, the game state, just like our chat channel system and the chat event graph, the game state will push an update to each player controller that's taking part in the conversation. So that's what this code is. If you compare this code to the one in the chat event graph, you'll see some similarities. So for this push private conversation to client, we need to set this to run on owning client. You can make it reliable if you'd like. I'm not, because it's not critical to the game. And reliable should be saved for game critical things. The one and only input should be of type S private conversation structure, and we'll call this private conversation. And connect up, connect up the inputs. And then, let's see. What we need to do now is we can go ahead and comment this, push private conversation to client. Let's make this bigger. Okay. So we need to grab the private conversation structure, we need to break it, and what we need in here is we need the ID, the conversation ID, and the messages, and that is it. So let's go ahead and add a new function, and we'll call this find private conversation window. We'll make this private and peer, and its one input will be the conversation ID, which is of type fluid, and it will output two variables. One will be a boolean called isFound, and the other will be called it'll be of type WB private conversation reference, which is our private conversation UMG, and we'll call this WB private, or WB underscore private conversation. Actually, we'll call this conversation window. There we go. Staying consistent. Compile and save. And what we need to do, so we've got, where is it at? It might be in chat system. Private, yeah. So we have this array of private conversation windows that will be, it's just an array of the private conversations that the user is currently taking part in. So we need to have this little helper function that will look through this list and find the one that we need based on the conversation ID. So in here, let's go ahead and right click the conversation ID inputs, not split, recombine. Promote to local variable, and we'll call this convo ID. Connect that up. And let's grab the WB private conversations, get it, and then run a for each loop. And then we need to grab, I don't think we've added it yet. No, we didn't. Really quick, let's go back to the WB private conversation. And we need to add, let me find it. in my notes. Okay, we need to go to the graph, create a new function called getConversationID. And what this is going to do is it will get the private conversation class variable. It will break it, and we only need the conversation ID. We're going to drag out this and look for copy. Get a copy of the GUID object. And then add a return node and plug in the copy to the return node. And instead of return value, we'll just call this conversation ID. So the reason why we are returning a copy is if we were to return an instance of the GUID, the same reference to the GUID that's in here, if that GUID changes, I believe it'll change in here too, and we don't want that. So that's why we return a copy. So if the outside code modifies that GUID structure, it doesn't change in here. Let's go back to our player controller and let's drag off the array element and look for get conversation ID, and I forgot something else. If we go back, let's make this public and appear, compile and save, and then we can go back and look for get conversation ID and get this out of the way. Okay. Drag off the conversation ID and do equal GUID and compare it to the convo ID that is passed into this function. So if it's equal, we can add a branch. If it's equal, we can return is found true, and the conversation window will be this array element, just like that. And let me turn something off really quick. Get this out of here. Okay. Let's grab this return node, and if the for each completes, that means we haven't found a conversation UMG widget. So we'll set this to false and leave that blank. And that should be that. Let's go back to the private conversation, or the private chat event graph. Grab our find private conversation window, plug in the conversation IDs right there. Come on. And then add a branch. If we found the private conversation window, what we need to do is we need to drag off this and call set conversation messages, call function. And we need to set it to this array of messages. And then what we need to do is we need to also have a check, add a reroute node, and let's move these up and out of the way. We need to drag off this and look for is in viewport, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Connect these up. And if this is not in the viewport, we need to drag off this again, add a reroute, and we need to call add to viewport. Okay. The reason for that is if I start a conversation with another user and we chat back and forth, and then I close my conversation window, we are removing the conversation window from the viewport, but the UMG widget, it stays alive. It doesn't get destroyed. And so when the other player sends me a message after I close my conversation with him, the widget will be returned. It'll have an instance here returned. And so, yeah, it'll add the new conversation messages, but without this, the conversation would not reappear on my screen. So that's why we need the add to viewport here. And we need this here because if we don't have this here and we just add to viewport all the time, then you get a bunch of warnings in the log about adding a widget to the viewport when it's already added. let's go ahead and create a new custom event and call this one create private conversation window, and its input will be private conversation, and its type will be S private conversation structure, and then drag off this false and then look for that event, create private conversation window, and call it, and pass in this private conversation object or structure reference, just like that. And let's see. Okay, so when we push the private conversation structure that's updated and has all the newest messages to the client, we break it, we find the UMG widget that may or may not be on the screen. If there is one on the screen, we set its messages. If it's not in the viewport because it was closed, then we add it to the viewport. Otherwise, if the private conversation window does not exist because, let's say, the user just sent me a message and it's our first conversation for the duration of the game, then we create a new private conversation window, which we will then show on the screen and have all the messages there. So let's go down here. Let's go down here. We can go and comment this and call it create a new private conversation window for the given conversation. And we'll make this pretty large. It's not a whole lot of complexity in here. Okay, let's drag off the private conversation, and we can call create, oh, it's not going to be in there. Let's drag off this execution pin and call create widget. Actually, let's save us some time and go back to the event graph. Go right down here where we are currently mocking the private conversation windows, and we're going to just go ahead and cut all of that and delete this for loop. Compile, save, go back to our private chat event graph and paste it in here. Okay. Plug in the private conversation inputs. Owning player will be self. And let's see. Let's just look through this really quick. Let's go ahead and move this down. And let's drag off this reroute node, add or call break S private conversation, and we only need the messages. And let's drag off this return value and call set conversation messages, call the event, just like that, and plug in the messages like that. And the reroute or the execution wires, plug those in. And then we add the conversation window to the array. We add it to the viewport. And then let's go ahead and copy these and cut those and paste those down here and get them out of the way. And we'll call this on close private conversation. And then let's drag off this event and look for the create event dispatcher and select our on close private conversation. Compile and save. Looking good. Let's drag off this UMG reference again and call what is it? Send message. Assign on send message. Let's go ahead and cut this event and bring it down here and call this on send private message. And same thing here. Connect up the execution wires, drag off the event, add a new event dispatcher, create event, and use our on send private message. Alright. And I believe that's it for that event. Let's go ahead and go down here and comment this on private conversation window closed. Get this out of the way. and we'll comment this, send private message from private conversation window. Let's go ahead and drag off the conversation window input and call get conversation participant. And then we need to call the replicated to server event send private message to server. Connect up the username to the target player and the message to the message and the execution wire. Okay, compile and save. And what are you complaining about? Okay, let's go back here and unchat or set this to public. There we go. Let's go back to the player controller, compile and save. Everything is happy and good there. And I believe that's it for this episode. So this player controller, everything in here, it allows the it's basically the glue between the game state and the UMG widget. So in our next episode, and our final episode for this series, what we will be doing is updating the game state to persist these messages and notify each player controller of the messages. So if I happen to leave anything out or forget something, then I will definitely know about it by the next video, and we'll work on it. We will implement it or fix it in the next video. But for now, I believe this is everything. Let's go ahead and test this really quick. What we can test should be the usernames working. Grunt is the name of this player. So if I come up here, it says Grunt, which is good. And if I send a message from this player, his name is Venom. And Venom, which is great. And if I send a message from him, his name is Sky. So the usernames are persisting throughout the player state. They're being saved to the chat messages that originate from the chat box here. Now if I do like a /PM Sky, hey Sky, nothing happens because we're not connected up to the game state yet, which means the private messages are not being persisted, and it means this code right here, the push private conversation to client, it's not being called yet. But in the next video, that'll be wired up and everything will be working from end to end. So let's go ahead and end this video here. I'm sorry, I'm already 18 minutes over. So look out for the next video, and please like and subscribe and share. It really helps me out. Alright, thanks for tuning in.